Interesting because now there's a huge awakening, not only about the Torah among the nations. This is my 9th country that I've visited this year. I've been in ministry now for full-time 15 years, and I've had 3 temple courses in different places in the world. And 15 years ago, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. All of a sudden now, the awakening of the desire to know about the Temple Mount. And it's not a coincidence to see how now we have an objection to what has already been established. This is a pattern. It always happens. Remember that in the Bible, in the book of Bereshit, in Genesis, it tells us that God put the tree of life and the tree of knowledge and evil. Someone's going to eat of the one or the other one, and you're going to know the fruit of it. Well, when it comes to the temple, this is what's happening. People are becoming aware. They want to know. They want to learn from you. But there's got to be an open door somewhere that we can become a bridge to give them the proper information. You got it. You have it. Do not let people from the West who are not educated or are willing to establish on the truth based on the God-given right of Israel to become his people, God's people. Don't let someone else, teach them who are not equipped or not even considering or respecting your research. Share it with us. If you don't want to, then teach it to me. I'm willing to go anywhere. People want to know. They're desperately. My sister earlier, I don't know her name. I'm so sorry. From the city of David, she did an amazing presentation for 7 minutes. Yes, she said she read the verses in Ezekiel to tell the house of Israel to be ashamed of their wickedness, of their abominations. Well, guess what? There are thousands of people all over Latin America, Sephardic Jews, who are scattered that I go to all the time, who are desperately looking for this message, and they need a hand. They need the information. If not, someone else is going to give it. And it's going to continue to grow the root of anti-Semitism. We can no longer stand for that. We must stand for the God of Israel. We must stand for the Torah. We must stand for the people. And we must stand for the covenant. And I need your help to help me go out there and continue to do this job.
We did a story with Anna Arena down in the city of David, and for the tour group that's with me, they'll be there tomorrow morning, and it's just an amazing experience. Even if you've never been to the city of David, it's really eye-opening. Lars, you were talking about Scripture, about how the early believers in Yeshua were actually sort of temple-centric. When did the centrality of the temple fade away in history, and do you see it increasing now?
Well, they were forced out from the temple, eventually, just a few years before the temple was destroyed. And so the Jewish people scattered after that, and the division began to come between those who were followers of Yeshua and those who were not. So we are seeing now that there is a opposite process going on of restoration. And I believe that our prayers are that this convention will be triggering a lot more of prayer and support for teaching on this matter, because really Christians need to be educated. I run into a lot of opposition too with this message, that people think we're really missed it big time here, but so we have to be willing to go in the front and take a lot of that flack, but eventually the truth will win.
You keep coming back. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something too about this with the location. I approached one ministry here in Jerusalem, inviting them to come here, and I don't want to mention which one it was, but they said we are really reluctant to do this because why should we as Jews? It's like saying, why do we have to prove that water is wet? I mean, that's how obvious it is to us as Jewish people where the temples were. That's no question among us. So when Christians come from the other side of the globe and come here and try to tell them, well, you have been wrong for 1,800 years, for 2,000 years, let me tell you where the temples really were. It just doesn't work. We have to get support with what the Jewish people have always gone with.
Yeah, Rico.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. What I've noticed is that when we read the first century writings, and you can see this, many people in the church systems, because the temple has been completely disregarded. But when you start reading the gospel, and you start reading the book of Acts. As a believer in Yeshua, all I see is temple language. Even the letters of Paul, they're all using temple language. And it's interesting, when I go to all these congregations, what I do, I don't tell them you need to believe in it. What I do, I just point out the highlights of the context of what is written in the Gospels. If you read it, you'll see there's temple language everywhere. Almost all the events, the important events that happen in the gospel narrative happen around even the Sabbath or the temple, the feast. You know, you can't celebrate the feast unless you go to the temple. You know, the Sabbath, it deals with a lot of temple purity. So, you know, this is what I'm trying to tell you, that I think that when we become a bridge and we start sharing the education, pointing out, look, did you see that? Let me tell you what that is on the Temple Mount. Then they go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Simple things go a long way.
Yeah. You know, we asked Chaim Richmond, you saw in that story there, about this idea that the Temple Mount wasn't on the temple, or the temple wasn't on the Temple Mount, and, well, you could see he dismissed that out of hand. You know, we have a few minutes left, and what I like to do at the end of interviews when I interview people is anything to add, anything that I haven't asked that's really on your heart. And we'll start with Daron and just work down.
Okay. I'll try to keep it short here. So I would say one thing is very important for you to understand, and ultimately the mission of Cry for Zion is to get, like I said, 1,000,000 times now it feels like, Jewish sovereignty on the Temple Mount. How much more is that important today than ever, when on Friday the United Nations had voted to disavow Jewish connection to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount? So just so you understand, this is the Israel issue of our time, and I think it's time that the Christian Zionists of the old, of the past, wake up and join with what's happening in the present, and that you take part in what we're doing today in the battle for Zion.
I want to agree with Daron right there. I think it's so important, the issue of sovereignty, and that's what Cry for Zion is about, is because you need to understand, if we're talking about politics here and the Temple Mount as well, if the Jewish people don't have a right to the Temple Mount, which is the most Jewish location in the country, what right do they have in Judea, in Samaria, in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Beersheba? It doesn't work. So it's a crucial issue for the Zionism, for Israel, for support for Israel. Secondly, one of the pastors that we've been in contact with through big ministries or whatever, the reason it's so important to discuss, and that our Jewish friends give us the grace to discuss these Christian theological issues, is because it makes a big difference for Christians who support Israel. Because he would say maybe something like, well, my prayer closet where I pray in the morning is more holy than the Temple Mount. I don't see that as biblical. But it makes a huge difference for how Christians are going to approach this issue. So thank you for allowing Christians to discuss these topics.
Well, if I may, I would like to kind of give you a sense of how important this meeting is not only to me, but that I believe that this is a fulfillment of prophecy based on Ezekiel 43. We are commanded, and I'll leave you with these verses because sometimes the verses explains the will of God better than my own words. And it says, you son of man, show the house to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. And if they are ashamed of all they have done, make known unto them the form of the house and the fashion thereof, and the gates thereof, and the entrances thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all its laws thereof, and write it in their sight, that they may keep the whole form thereof, and all of the ordinances thereof, and do them. This is the law of the house. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be most holy. And the word that it says is holy, holies in the Hebrew. Ladies and gentlemen, we are fulfilling prophecy with this conference. And I want to thank you guys for taking the initiative and allowing us to stand for the word of the Lord. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that I'm not here to criticize the Israeli government, but I am reminded of something that happened in the Knesset. I think it was earlier this year or maybe at the end of last year. Probably, though, in the context of these metal detectors that were placed on the Temple Mount. And one of the Arab Knesset members stood up and said to the Jewish colleagues, you know you have no right on this place. You know that in your heart because you gave the key back to us.
Good one.
And that's the way that it is being interpreted by the Muslim community. If the Jewish people had a right to that place, they would never have given it back. So this is a matter of prayer for us, that we, once again, we stand in support of, even because this panel is about politics and Temple Mount, to people like Moshe Feiglin and others who want to really emphasize the rights of Israel to their most holy place. Let's pray for them, let's support them, and let's see redemption come.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
If you would like to ask a question, please come down to Joy here. I think is going to have a microphone, and I think she could probably go from side to side. As you're coming and thinking about a question, I do have another one for Lars. Lars, you keep mentioning prayer. Why is prayer so important?
Well, I think partly because that's the way God called me to prayer, but and I believe that the expression, by the way, that gripped me when it came to prayer is an old saying by John Wesley. I believe that God will do nothing except through prayer. It all has to start there, and that initiates the process. The state of Israel, I believe, to a large extent, was prayed into being by an intercessor like Rees Howells, who gave his life to see this state being born in 1948. And when that happened, he said, this is the greatest victory for the Holy Spirit in 2,000 years. That was quite remarkable. But I'm telling you, we are getting close now to something that is even greater than 1948, something that is even greater than 1967. And that is the redemption of the Temple Mount. When that takes place, I like to compare it to if 1948 was the hour hand on God's clock that began to tick, and the deliverance of Jerusalem, the unification of Jerusalem in 1967 was the minute hand on God's clock, then the redemption of the Temple Mount, Mount Zion, we know it from Psalm 102. When that takes place, God will appear in his glory. That's the second hand on God's clock. We are right there standing now at the threshold of this. We've seen 50 years since the reunification of Jerusalem, and now it has been 70 years since the State of Israel was founded. It is time for the next step on God's agenda. And it was amazing when one of the speakers here, I forget now, mentioned about this coin of the comparing Trump with Cyrus. Did you know that the White House released this information to move the embassy to Jerusalem took place on the very day, exactly 70 years after the vote in the United Nations? And then it just so happens that it was established here, even against the first plans, exactly 70 years on the Roman calendar after the State of Israel was born. So these are not coincidences. It is the hand of heaven, and we're living in prophetic times, so let's get with it, folks.
We have a question over here.
Do you think it is possible that the rebuilding of the temple will take place in a peaceful manner, or will it be inevitable as a result of great conflict?
Sure, Lars, you can start.
I can start. I believe that it should be, this is what the Jewish sages teach, that it has to be built in peace. But it will most likely be being preceded by conflict. So that's my take on it.
have to say, I really don't know, and only God knows.
Rico?
I mean, well, you got to remember, for peace to happen, conflict must occur. That's just been a pattern throughout history. And I think that something dramatic is going to happen that would move the heart of the people to start moving towards Israel again. I don't know what that is, and I don't call myself a prophet because they all die in the Bible. So I just basically watch what's going on around the world, things becoming more and more clear. But I'm agreeing with him. I think it could be a time of peace after conflict. How will that happen? How long it will be? I'm not sure. But I'm just going to get ready, doing what we can to get people ready.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say this, though. As I said before, a policy of appeasement in order to avoid conflict invites more conflict in the end.
That is so true.
Yeah.
That is very true.
That I will say.
Yes, sir.
Next question.
Thank you. I'm going to tie into his question in asking, we know that since the establishment of the Jewish state, the importance of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of Rock has been ramped up in the Islamic world. And they place great emphasis on it these days, probably specifically to counter the very issue. But in all the presentations we've seen today, it's sort of required the Dome of Rock and probably the mosque to be destroyed as well in the construction of the temple. So this doesn't seem to just be a build the temple issue. It seems to be a what to do while you destroy it. What is the response of the nations going to be? How are you going to defend Israel against the extreme hate or conflict coming your way if you would destroy those buildings? So is it just the one issue, and what about this other important thing to consider?
Who would like to answer that one?
That's a loaded one.
Yeah, that's been the question.
Are you sure you want to answer that one?
That's been the question we've been getting all day, I feel like. So it's interesting to see the reaction, how things change, especially in this clip that you played before, this report about what happened in 1967 when Israel miraculously regained, the mountain of the house, the Temple Mount, that there was a Jordanian, the official tour guide of the Jordanian government, apparently a Muslim man from his tradition, was saying, we have a tradition that the Jewish people will come here and rebuild the temple, and I want to contribute. So it seems like to me that it doesn't necessarily have to be this thing. When Israel is in the place and in the identity that it needs to be, it seems that there is an openness on among the surrounding nations to respond in a different way than with just conflict. And I know we don't know what will happen, at least I don't know, when it comes to the Temple Mount and how that would happen, but I do know the steps that need to be taken now when it just comes to prayer on the Temple Mount. That the Jewish people have the freedom to pray on the Temple Mount, that they are sovereign on the Temple Mount. That is politically what needs to happen. When it comes to conflict with other peoples, with the Muslim tradition, with Arabs, I think that needs to be solved somehow. I don't know how.
Yeah, Lars?
Well, I want to repeat something that was in the breakout session that I was leading here, that Rabbi Ari Abramovich said, that I think is very encouraging here. He said that in rabbinic sources, they say because Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised, Islam will have 100 years for each of those years, 1,300 years before their power will be broken. And it is basically exactly 1,300 years now since those mosques were built on the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. I think it has to be something supernatural that is going to happen for this thing to take place. And how God will do it, We don't know. But the answer is not to blow up the mosque of Auburn, that's for sure. It will not happen.
Let me just add one
okay, go ahead, Doran.
Let me just add one little thing here that most of you are not considering, I don't think. It's very common and typical, I notice, with Christian audiences to immediately jump to the Islam-Israel conflict. You're completely forgetting about the Catholic Church. You're completely forgetting about the aspirations of the Pope and the Vatican to the Temple Mount as well. That's another factor that you need to take into consideration with the what if. And as far as how it's going to pan out, I don't know. I'm just saying this is another equation you need to put into the what if scenarios.
Yeah, what is the Catholic perspective? Just briefly.
A can of worms. Okay. I don't know all of the details. All I know is that from the research that I've done, is that the Catholic Church is also doing things behind the scenes to gain access to the Temple Mount as well, to have some type of control up there. I'm not exactly sure with all the details, so I can't say. One thing I can tell you is besides the Muslims here in the region that we have to battle, so to speak, you also have another foreign entity which wants to revive its caliphate, and that's Turkey. And they're actually the only ones, or the main ones, internationally speaking, outside of Israel or outside the Middle East, that are very, very active, and more active actually, and you don't mostly know this, more active than the Palestinians or any other entities in this region. And they're doing a lot to try to gain control of the Temple Mount, and you're not even aware of it.
Right. Rico.
Yes, to add this perspective that maybe answer your question, what we must remember and never forget is that the God of Israel has this character trait that is very unique, that I love. He has the ability to redeem. And it's always in the time of trouble. It's always in the time when Israel forgets about inner fighting. There's got to either be famine, or there's got to be exile, or there has to be persecution. When they finally realize that no matter how hard we try on our own strength, we may not be able to establish the Temple Mount and do the temple on our own strength. We may be persecuted, we may be followed, we may be unjustly, whatever you want to call it, but then we cry out as one people, as one voice. And He is the Redeemer, and He will restore His house, because that's the throne of His glory. And we will never lose sight of that. Yes, all these powers that we see, we talk about, important to understand. But who knows? The Bible talks about an earthquake. Think about that. It's an act of God. Why don't let Him do it?
Before we get to the next question, let me follow up with that question that's been asked of me, and perhaps it's been addressed before. Can the Temple Mount be built without destroying the Dome of the Rock?
That thing's got to go.
I've heard that before. I mean,
So there was a theory. There was a theory that was proposed to the prime minister, I believe, by someone from the Hebrew University, that the temple was not underneath the Dome of the Rock. And it seemed to have been research done for political purposes to say we could build a temple next to it. But since that's not possible, we're left with this quandary. But I think all of these speculations, in one sense, are unnecessary because we know what the matter at hand is in front of us: Israeli sovereignty on the Temple Mount and Jewish prayer. The other things are speculation.
Yeah, next question.
Hi, I'm just want to first say I'm a Christian, so I believe Jesus is the Messiah. But I have the last couple of years I've studied Torah and really become friends with a lot of Jewish people. And today I'm not as dogmatic because today it's like this is what I believe today, and I'm fine if somebody doesn't believe a certain way, and that's okay. But the thing that I feel personally is I'm supposed to help the Jewish people as a Gentile, as a Christian, fulfill what they've been called to do. But Moshe said something very important. This is the question. He said the Jewish people do not want Jerusalem. And I've been watching a lot of documentaries the last year, and that was something I noticed, even from 1948. There was such an argument back then amongst the Jews whether they should come back to Jerusalem. Today I hear it from Jews that I know that I don't want to go back. Why should I go back? They disagree with things that are going on. it seems like there's a dissension amongst the Jewish people. But yet, from a Gentile and from a Christian, I feel this is what my purpose in life is, to help some way. And that's why I'm here today. This is what I believe today. But how do we help them? How do we help them see? How do we help just say something, say the right thing to open their eyes to say, you know what? Because today when I was at the restaurant, I asked the guy, a Jewish guy, I said, hey, do you keep Shabbat? He's like, no. I said, do you celebrate Hanukkah? He's like, well, kind of. I go, do you believe this is a holy city? He's like, yeah. And I was like, I go, so why don't you keep Shabbat? He's like,
So,
I think
so how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty basic answer for you on that one. When the people of Israel see that the passion and the zeal of the nations is stronger for our Torah, for our land, for our holy mountain, or at least it's combating with it, right? It's conflicting with our lack of passion, is what's going to stir our zeal and our passion for what we hold to be true.
I tell you, what's going to work against it a lot is if you come in and say, you guys totally dropped the ball and forgot where the temple was. And and we know you were wrong again, and we know where it is. And let me tell you, that's not going to work. And so I think you're really coming from a great heart, and I see myself in the same position. And I think the Jewish people it's an amazing thing, the difference between 50 years ago and today.
Yes.
Things have changed. Yes. The country is changing in amazing ways. Israel is becoming more faith-based as a society. There are very few outspoken atheists in Israel, or like the demographics, they're shrinking. And I think that's, there are indicators there, but I don't really think it's my place to be like, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. In a certain sense, I want to be spurring people in the right direction, but it needs to come from the right attitude and not like, listen to me, I know what I'm doing, and you don't.
Yeah. Rico.
You provoke people to jealousy by your actions. One of the verses in the book of Genesis, chapters 18, that gives Israel its mission. He says, for I know that Abraham will teach his children to keep the way of the Lord and to do mishpat v'sadakah, righteousness and justice, so that what God promised Abraham will come true. Well, guess what? What people fight for more than anything is the inheritance and identity. Think about it. In the Bible, that's the whole thing. But if instead of us fighting for an identity and fighting for an inheritance that belongs to Israel, why don't we just join, like the Apostle Paul says, you're grafted into the olive tree. And then we provoke to jealousy, not by telling you how bad you are, how many things you're doing wrong, but we provoke you to jealousy by taking the message of hope, of righteousness and justice, revealing the mission that you and I can do together so the nations will know that there's no other God but the God of Israel. Amen. So we do it through action, not through words. People can know the Torah by heart, but what is the use if you don't act according to the character of God? People can say they love Yeshua all they want, but what does it mean if you don't act according to the character of the Torah? So through our actions, I think we can really have a better chance to extend that bridge, to bring the reconciliation, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another question. Here we go. Jim Barfield.
I have a very direct question. Daron said something yesterday when we got to meet for the first time. I loved it. He said, let's stop talking. Let's start doing. There's a congressman that contacted me the other day. And he said, Mr. Barfield, I really want to help you with this. And I said, how? And this is where the question is coming from. He said, I know a gentleman at the White House. He said, and I think he will help you. And he said, but we're going to have to start with his vice president. Because, listen, if he really is to act as Cyrus, and I see this over and over in the scripture, is that history repeats itself. So if Trump really is the Cyrus that we believe he is, he's not done. He helped them get their capital back, but he also gave them back their kelim, their vessels. He gave them back all these things. And this gentleman, this congressman said, let's start with Pence and let's work our way up, which that's not far to work. So what I need from you guys is who should I contact in the Israeli government that will work with me, that believes enough. And then I would love to get this other gentleman that spoke after me, get him involved. Because it's not about who finds it, it's about that it is found. So do you have an answer? Do you know someone I could talk to within the Israeli government that's got the chutzpah to get up and do this?
Daron?
The very short answer to that is yes.
Where have you been all my life?
I assume
But
that,
I can't go into detail.
Yeah, I assume that would be a private conversation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Then I have achieved my goal. Thank you very much.
All right. We have probably 2 more questions, and that might be it. So go ahead.
Thank you. My question is about, I'm coming from the Christian perspective, the main reasons why a Christian would not want to get behind this sort of a movement. This is a great convention. I love its purpose. What are the main things that comes to a Christian's mind why they would not want to support this, besides, of course, replacement theology? What about how, if the next temple will be built, then the man of perdition is going to sit on there, and I don't want to be part of that. What are some of the other things that Christians say that, no, I can't get behind that? And how do you address it?
So I think that was just 2 questions in one.
Nice.
All right, Daron. Oh, John.
So that's a Christian theological question, and we just had a session on that, a breakout session, a whole one about common Christian theological questions that people have when it comes to the Temple Mount. Specifically, this one is what about the Temple of Antichrist? It's very popular. So there's an article in your resource magazine that goes into depth, but maybe you could summarize, and you guys could help me out too, is, there seems to be a place where, well, let's back up. Daniel prophesied the events of Hanukkah, where Antiochus Epiphanes, before the time of Jesus, went in and desecrated the temple and set up an abomination that causes desolation, according to the prophet Daniel. And what's interesting is that Jesus and Paul refer to this in Matthew and in 2 Thessalonians as that this would happen again. My 2 answers that I give to this, there are many, but 2 that are important, is when Paul speaks about the temple, he says this is the temple of God. He doesn't say this is the temple of some evil king, some other thing. It's God's temple. It's not Herod's temple. It's not Antiochus Epiphanes' temple. It's not the Antichrist's temple. It's nobody's temple. It's sacred to God. An enemy can only profane something that's sacred to God. Secondly, Daniel prophesied that this would happen through Antiochus Epiphanes during the time of Hanukkah. But that did in no way conflict with God's will in the Bible and encouraged by the prophets to rebuild the second temple. So why would a repeat conflict in any way? So those are 2 questions that I think, 2 answers.
I'd like to answer strictly via temple function, if I may. We do know that there only one person who is able to sit in the court of the priests, the Asara, and that's only a king of the line of David. The priests could not sit anywhere in the priestly courtyard, nor anyone who was not supposed to be there, because it represented the authority of God. You see, David was chosen by the Creator. The king of Israel was chosen by the Creator. They are the image of God on the earth. So when a king sits in that area, north of the altar, he has the authority to sit there because God has given him the legal right to rule the people as the king. When in Thessalonians talks about that the son of perdition will sit, it's not in the Holy Holies, because not even David is allowed to go into the Holy Holies. You think that after 2,000 years, there's not a temple, and that a Kohen HaGadol, a priest, or the priestly line that will be in that temple being restored, is going to allow someone to go in there? They'd rather die. We're not going to allow that to happen ever again. But what if what is called the son of perdition sits north of the altar? He's declaring himself king of Israel, king of the house, king of the earth. And that's why chaos ensues. It's a legal issue that is going on. You see, in the first century, especially in Imperial Rome, when you did not offer a sacrifice to the emperor. That was a treason and an affront to his authority. As a matter of fact, that's what started the whole issue with the temple. They refused to sacrifice on behalf of the emperor. Well, imagine if this man sits in the court of the priests where only a king of David can sit. That is called encroachment in the Bible. And that's why, chaos ensues after that. It's more of a legality issue that many people, sadly, in the systems of religion and the replacement theology circles, or people are trying to find out because they're not understanding some aspects of the legality of the temple. Sometimes we don't quite clearly see, and they sadly misunderstand the context and stay away from supporting the temple instead of understanding the legality of what it's trying to tell you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last question.
I'm young and not an expert on any of these topics yet, and I'm from a generation that really believes this false narrative that's being pushed upon them in the universities and other areas. Where can I send them to get the facts and truth besides the Bible that they could believe and is credible?
What are you talking about? The location of the temple, or
Location,
what,
Temple
about what?
Mount, Jews being in their homeland, the entire subject.
Cryforzion.com?
Well, basically, Cry for Zion. Yeah, it's Cry for Zion, because we're the only resource out there right now that I know of that is Temple Mount, a Temple Mount activist organization for the Christian world. We're really the only ones I know of out there. You have teachers like the ones that we have here from the Christian world. They've been teaching on this for years. And what we're doing is we have programming. We have the Temple Mount Report, where we have interviewed these gentlemen and others that will be coming to educate the people on that using social media, etc. Plus, you have the Defenders of Zion issue here, which is going to be a great read for anybody who has questions about this matter.
I think I would really encourage people to support Cry for Zion, because we have a lot of work to do, a lot of questions to answer, not just Christian theology, but rights and Zionism, secular questions, Jewish questions, Christian questions that needs to be done. So we're appreciative of all support that we can get.
And by the way, this year, I'm making an announcement here. We're actually going to be doing more activism in the U.S. on college campuses. So you just... This is part of our strategy for this coming year that I'm now announcing before you all. And so, if you support us, you're supporting an activist that's going to be on a college campus. You're supporting their tickets to fly and move from one city to another in Washington, D.C., etc. Our goal is to be very aggressive in this coming year, mainly in the U.S. side, because we know that's where we'll see the fruit of it on this side of the ocean.
And I believe Rico's website would be Wisdom and Torah Ministries.
Wisdomandtorah.com.
Okay, wisdomandtorah.com. Also, Lars's book, Joy for the Whole Earth. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you want news, go to cbnnews.com. Well, Lars, you've been talking a lot about prayer. Why don't you close this session with prayer?
Oh, hallelujah. Let's join together in prayer. Father, we're very grateful for this opportunity to gather here in your holy city. Thank you for what we see already now before our very eyes. What you have done in just this short time since this state was born in 1948. And now we're looking towards the future. And I pray that you would mobilize all around the world such a zeal for the most holy place on earth, that we will soon see your glory being revealed from Zion, and all the nations of the earth shall see that glory and stream to the holy mountain of God. We want to see that soon in our day. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for this convention here today, for everyone who has been speaking, for the people who have come, for the word that is going out over the internet. Thank you for the opportunity to go out to the nations with the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And we pray in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Lars, Rico, John, Daron. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
You. And before you leave, just let me make an announcement for everyone who pre-ordered a sandwich. They're available in the lobby, and the next session will start at 6:15, about 40 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Lars. Yeah,
By the way, there is somebody that left a phone at one of the tables, so it's waiting for you, ma'am.